Welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. Today we're going to make a pillowcase just like this one. You will need 3/4 of a yard for your main fabric. This portion. You'll need 1/4 of a yard for the border. And then 1/12 of a yard or a 3-inch strip for this little accent piece. This is optional. You do not have to have the accent piece. So welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. Today we're going to make a pillowcase just like this one. You will need 3/4 of a yard for your main fabric. This portion. You'll need 1/4 of a yard for the border. And then 1/12 of a yard or a 3-inch strip for this little accent piece. This is optional. You do not have to have the accent piece. So if you don't want to get that, that's fine. You can either source your own fabric, or you can go to my Etsy shop, also called Aunt Debbie's Boutique, and we have kits already made up that you can choose from that have the pieces already cut out. And they come with printed instructions of the pattern too. You can also get just the pattern on my website, on my Etsy shop. So if you don't want to source your own fabrics, you can purchase a kit instead, and they are $15, which is probably close to what you would spend unless you bought fabric on sale or something to buy your own. So consider that option. But today we're going to start from the very beginning and cut our pieces. I need a 27-inch piece. Remove my rulers here. Of my fabric. And how am I going to do this? Let's see. This is 36. 10, 20, 27 inches. Now I am using a rotary cutter and a cutting mat. But if you don't have that, that's okay. You can just get a straight edge and some sort of marking pen and mark where to cut, and then use a scissor. I'm a little cramped for space here in my studio, so you're just going to have to take my word that's 27 inches. And that's going to be kind of hard to cut, so I'm going to move it. And I want to make sure, I've got this folded twice on this bolt, and you want to make sure that you've lined it up on both edges so they're straight. And if this first edge is not straight, then you need to straighten it too first. So we're going to cut off a 27-inch piece of our main fabric. And we will lay that aside. I store all my fabric on comic book boards like this. You can get them in bulk off of Amazon. Then we need 1/4 of a yard, which is 9 inches of our border fabric. here. Again, I cut it with my rotary cutter, but you can mark it and cut it with a scissor. And then a 3-inch piece, which is also 1/12 a yard, and I don't know if they sell 1/12 a yard. You might have to buy an 1/8 or a 1/4. Of our insert piece. Okay. Next, we want to open all of our pieces up and iron them really good. I'm a fanatic about ironing when you're sewing, because by not ironing, your pieces don't always fit exactly right, and your end product won't look quite as good. So that's something simple that you can do that will really give your final product a polish. Some of these folds are a little bit difficult to get out. It might take a little starch or some steam to get those out completely, but we'll get them mostly out and they'll work. A little squirt there. My iron is just now heating up pretty good, so maybe it'll get them a little better. You can see how by having these wrinkles in there, if they got sewn in that way, your pillowcase would be nice and square, or rectangular, I guess. And if your fabric's very wrinkled, it's best to iron it before you even cut it. Since mine's been wrapped on these boards, they shouldn't be too wrinkled. Now I'm not going to worry too much about this center seam, center fold, because our pillowcase is going to be folded right there. So if we take it out, we're just going to put it back in when we're through. But the rest of the folds and wrinkles need to come out. Okay, we're going to call that good. And then we're going to go back to our cutting board, because we need to make sure, just going to move my iron, we need to make sure that all our pieces are exactly the same width. And I said, I believe 42 inches. I'll leave this open on my pattern. This is a very forgiving pattern, so you can be flexible an inch or so, plus or minus on that, because all pillowcases are not exactly the same size. As long as your pillow fits in it, you're good. But if you can see here now, these are not all the same width, plus we've got our selvage on there, and we don't want that in our final product. So I'm going to line all these up perfectly the same. And then I'm going to get my long ruler and make sure it's lined up real good here over on the edge. And I'm going to measure out, since these are double, folded in half. I don't have that one folded perfectly. I'm going to measure over 21 inches, which would make 42 when it's opened out. And as you can see, I'm still going to have just a hair of the selvage on there, but it'll be in our seam. As long as it's not more than 1/4 of an inch, you're okay. Now, if you purchase one of the kits from my Etsy store, these will all be cut out to this point. And from then on, I mean, you won't have to worry about cutting it out. And you'll just have to follow the instructions from here on. Okay. Now, our next step is to open the body of our pillowcase completely out. And this is where you need to pay close attention to if you have a print that needs to go one way or the other. This is called a toss print, where they're going all different directions. It's a minion toss. So it doesn't matter which is up and which is down. But let's say you had some fabric from your university, and it had your big logo and the name of your university. You would want to make sure that that wasn't facing upside down when you made your pillowcase. So make sure that the part we're going to sew on is the top of the fabric. Next, we're going to take our little strip. And you know what? I think I'll iron this before. You can either iron it before or after, but I think it will be better if I iron it before. We're going to iron it this way in half. Being careful to keep your cut edges even. Okay. I'm going to lay this down. Let me move my ruler. At the top of our pillowcase, we're going to have the raw edges next to the raw edges. And we're going to place it across there. And we want to match up our center fold there and across there, and we're going to pin it. But before we do that, let's iron our border piece. the same way in half. And we'll just have to pin it once. We'll pin all of them together. This little ironing board that I have here is really handy and portable, and I use it all the time. And they make some of them that have a cutting board on the other side, and so those are really nice, especially if you're going to travel and you need a cutting mat like this and a ironing board. You can have it all in one. This one is strictly an ironing one. Okay. Next, we're going to lay this right on top of the others. And we're going to pin. I like to put a pin in the center. And since we cut them all exactly the same, we should line up the edges exactly on both ends, and it should fit. Your fabric can stretch a little while you're sewing it, just a little bit. And if you don't pin it first, you can get to the end and one of your pieces of fabric will be longer than the others. So we don't want that to happen. Now we want to come in and we can pin it 4 to 5 inches apart, making sure that there's 5 layers in there. So we want to make sure all 5 layers are lined up. Okay, now we're ready to begin sewing. So let's go over to our sewing machine. Okay, I am using just a neutral thread color with this. I use neutral for most of my sewing, but you could use an orange that matched the background of this, or you could use a blue that was a pretty contrast, because we are going to do some top stitching and you might want a pretty contrast on that. But you can use whatever you decide. The needle that I'm using is a size 11. This is an organ needle. You can, any of these, that might even be a little bit big. You might want to use just a 9, but this is fine for what we're sewing. I'm going to set my stitch on about 2, my stitch guide. Some people, I was taught to sew it at 3. Quilters will put it on 2 to even a little smaller, 1.5 for teeny tiny stitches. The tinier they are, the harder they are to rip out. And actually 2.5 is probably adequate for this. Now I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam, which is usually about the width of your presser foot. And you want to make sure that you follow the pattern as for the width of the seam, because it will make, especially if it's clothing, it will make a difference in how everything fits. Okay, when we first start to sew, we're going to take a few stitches. Uh-oh, I have mine set on zigzag. Sorry about that. I'm going to have to take care of that. I'm going to start over here. Let me just rip it out real quick. See, even experienced seamstresses make mistakes. Make sure everything's lined up again. And you don't want to run over any of your pins. So I want to make sure I have my threads out of the way to the back. If you run over your pins, it can mess up the alignment on your machine, just like if you hit a curb, it'll mess up the alignment on your tires on your car, which I do quite often. Okay, we're going to take a few stitches forward, and then we're going to go back about 2 stitches, and my thread broke. Not the best way to demonstrate. Okay, we're going to try here one more time. We're going to take a few stitches, and then I'm going to back up a couple, and that's like tying a knot, so it doesn't come unthreaded. And now we're just going to sew, and I didn't get that behind there real good. It'll take care of itself here. We're going to sew and keeping our fabric even on this raw edge with our presser foot. Take out my pin. Stopping before I run over that pin. Another thing that can happen is the needle can hit the pin and break the needle, and it can go flying off. And I had that happen one time when I was teaching a children's class, and it flew up and hit a little girl in the eye. So be very careful about that. You do not want to run over your pins. And I didn't mention earlier, but this project is very kid-friendly. This is always the first project I start with when I teach children to sew. And I've been teaching kids classes, for probably 30 to 40 years. And you'll be surprised. Children aren't afraid of machinery like us adults are. And a child will a lot of times pick it up faster than an adult because an adult is afraid of doing something wrong. And little boys love to sew just as much as little girls. The worst problem I had with them is they like to run the sewing machine like it's a race car. And they will floorboard that foot pedal. You just have to teach them patience and to slow down. Didn't have a pin there. I should have had at least one more pin in there. Make sure all my layers are together. Okay, when we get to the end again, we're going to stop and we're going to put it in reverse for a few stitches and then go forward again, tying it off so that it doesn't come unsewed. Of course, you'll regret that if you have to rip it out, because then you have 3 layers to rip out. But we're going to assume we don't rip. All right, our next step is going to be to take it back to the ironing board and to iron this all out real good. Okay, here we are back at our ironing station. And we're just going to iron this out real smooth, tugging a little bit so you get your seams to lay nice and smooth. And I should mention, I'm ironing it with both of these raw edges down towards the body. So the borders are ironed down towards the body of the pillowcase. Okay, the next step is an optional one, but I like to do it because it makes your final product nice and crisp. And that is, we're going to come in here and we're going to top stitch right close to our seam there. So let's go back to the sewing machine. Okay, I forgot to mention earlier, but we should always trim our seams, any loose threads, because they will get tangled up and cause us headaches later. Okay, when I top stitch, I don't want to go a full 1/4 inch because I probably won't catch the bottom seam if I do that. I want to cut that in about half. So what I do, I want to do about an 1/8 inch from this seam. What I do is just follow the point on my sewing machine, on my presser foot here. And you don't have to back stitch on this because it's just top stitching. It's not a seam that's sewing everything together. So I find a place on my foot to line up on that seam and just sew straight down. And so you can see that's about an 1/8 inch, about half. You can even get it closer if you want. But let's finish top stitching this. Okay, let's cut our thread and cut it close so we don't have any threads getting in our way. And now look at our beautiful top stitching job. Okay, it's time to pin some more. So we'll go back to our cutting table for that. Okay, now what we want to do is fold our pillowcase lengthwise like this with the right sides together. The outside, what we want to show later, we want to put it in the middle. And we're going to pin our seams. We want to line this up real carefully at the top. And when you pin a seam, I didn't say this earlier, but you should put your pins in perpendicular with your seam. So let's just pin it, and we want to make sure our seams meet there. And then I'm going to jump down here to the very end and pin it, because we are assuming we cut this out perfectly rectangular and that everything should meet. And then I just kind of tug between the two pins and so that the fabric is all distributed equally, and place as many pins as you feel like you need in there. The more we sew, the less we think we need pinned, and sometimes that can be our downfall. So you can never pin too much. Okay, it does look like I'm off just a hair down here. Didn't pin it perfectly, but that's going to happen. Now I'm going to turn it, and we're going to pin it across the bottom. We have 2 more seams to sew, and we're going to be completely done. I'm going to pin it over here at the fold. It's pinned on that side. Then pin it, tug on it, pin it in the middle. This is just to keep one piece from stretching more than the other, if you make sure your ends meet at the beginning. Okay, we're going to sew our 1/4 inch seam down this seam. Then we're going to sew one across there, and then it's time to trim it up and iron it, and we'll be done. Okay, I'm ready to sew, and I see I made another mistake. I want to start sewing at the top of my pillowcase, but I've pinned it on the other side. So what I'm going to do is just go down here and move each pin to the right side. I wasn't paying attention to that when I pinned it. I'll just hold the fabric in place while I change all my pins, because you always want your pins on the top side, the side you're sewing, because you will run over them if you don't see them on the back side like that. Looks like my sewing machine came in threaded again while I was messing with this. Okay. This sewing machine was my grandmother's that she got in 1954, I believe. And so I have named her Edna after my grandmother. I have about 12 different machines, but this one just sews so good, and I decided to use it for my tutorials. Doesn't do anything fancy, although it does do zigzag, which most of these older ones do not. Okay, now my pins are on the right side. We're going to go back to our 1/4 inch seam allowance, which means our presser foot is right here by the edge. We'll make sure and take out my pin. And it's very important that you keep these two, the front and the back here, lined up. And that's why I want to start at the top, because if we get off and one side's a little bit longer than the other, it won't hurt at the bottom, but it'll really show up here at the top. So let's take a few stitches, then go back. Now then we can take off, and we've tied our knot. When you get to these seams, they're going to be very thick. So if you don't have a real heavy-duty machine, go real slow over these, because we got 2, 4, 6. six thicknesses of fabric there. Please ignore my dog in the background. You can see my fabric's kind of scrunching up here. That's just because I've got the camera in the way. Please try to keep your fabric laying smoothly and flat as you sew. It'll help it to not get folded under or caught in a seam that it's not supposed to. Okay, when I get down here, I'm going to sew until I only have a 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to guess at what a 1/4 inch is, but from the edge. Lift with my needle down, I lift my presser foot and turn it so we're ready to sew the next side. You can sew all the way off the edge and then start at the edge and sew this way too, but it makes it harder to trim your corners. So now we're going to continue our seam going this way. I back stitched a little bit at the end too. Okay, now you have completed your pillowcase. Let's trim the corners. You can see we want to get a little of the bulk out of the way for when we turn it inside out. Right here. Get kind of close, but don't cut your seam. And then I'm going to cut my threads. We're going to turn it inside out, and you can see my seams didn't meet perfectly. But this is still a usable, good pillowcase, and nobody but you will notice that. So we're going to turn it inside out and go back to our ironing board. Okay, I've turned it right side out. Here's another thread that needs cutting. And I want to make sure my corners are pointed out real good. And you can stick a scissor in there, or you can use a pin, or I use a seam ripper sometime to kind of dig out your corner. Just make sure you don't cut any threads. Or put a hole in it. And now I'm going to go right along on the seam here. And iron. Sometimes it's easier if you iron it while it's still wrong side out. Just iron it flat and then turn it. Now on this seam, and that makes me mad that I didn't get that any closer, but it won't be the first time I've done something like that, or the last. And I bet if I put it on a pillow, nobody would ever notice it. Okay. Now we have a pillowcase, and I like to fold mine down 1/3, down 1/3 again, and then 1/3 this way, 1/3 like that. And there's our completed pillowcase. So thank you for stopping in and working with me on making a pillowcase. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it wasn't frustrating, because sewing should be fun. And that's why I like to say I teach the love of sewing. It should be a stress reliever. You should feel like you've accomplished something, and it should be a sense of joy in your life. So frustration is going to happen occasionally, but just remember to keep trying. Perfection only comes with experience. And whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Thank you. Next week, or the next video, we will sew the same pillowcase, but we're going to use a little more advanced sewing technique, and we're going to enclose our seams so that even on the inside, you can't see the seams. These seams will be completely enclosed so you can't see them. And that's just a little more advanced technique. Doesn't make the pillowcase any more functional. It won't last any longer. It's just a little advanced experience if you want to try it. And if not, that's fine too. So be watching for that video. Thank you. So